The elderly, wealthy woman lived alone in the countryside, always believing she was loved and cared for by her children. But one day, she accidentally overheard a heartbreaking truth. They only cared about her wealth, not her well-being. Devastated, she left her home, hoping to reconnect with the memories of her late husband, when exhaustion overcame her, and she collapsed by the roadside. A poor black family happened to pass by and brought her into their home. There, she experienced a warmth she hadn't felt in years. And when she leaves, one family's life will be forever changed, and her own children will soon come to understand what they had truly lost. Eleanor Simmons had lived in that quiet house for nearly 30 years, long after her husband passed and the laughter of her children had faded into echo. The house, with its creaky wooden floorboards and the ivy crawling along the brick walls, stood like a stubborn reminder of a time when warmth was abundant and holidays meant something more than lonely dinners reheated in a microwave. The oak tree outside the front porch had grown wild and proud over the years, just like her memories, tangled and heavy with time. At 74, Eleanor wasn't fragile, not in spirit anyway. But the past winter had left her with a nasty bout of flu that drained her more than she wanted to admit. That morning, as she settled into her floral armchair with a warm shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a cup of weak chamomile tea, her phone rang. The name Michael lit up the screen, and her heart, as it always did. Her son rarely called without a reason, but Eleanor, ever hopeful, never let the irregularity of his affection dilute the joy of his voice. She answered quickly, her voice trembling just slightly, more from excitement than age. "Michael, dear, what a nice surprise," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, cheerful, the way she used to sound when she would wake him up for school. His voice on the other end was clear, perhaps a little too crisp, like he was walking while talking, or maybe half distracted, but he asked about her health, about whether she was eating well, if she needed anything. Eleanor's heart swelled. He remembered she had been sick. She smiled and reassured him she was fine, recovering, though her appetite hadn't fully returned. He responded with concerned tones and words that to her felt like the warmest blanket after a cold day. "I just wanted to check in, Ma," he said. "Been thinking about you." And in that moment, Eleanor believed him. She told him about the weather, the neighbor's new dog that wouldn't stop barking, and the way the daffodils were starting to bloom early this year. Michael laughed in the right places, made the usual sounds, and promised he'd call again soon. But then something happened. As she lowered the phone to hang up, she realized the call hadn't disconnected. She pulled the phone back up to her ear just as she heard his voice again, only now it was no longer directed at her. "She's still okay?" Damn. I thought she'd be weaker by now. Eleanor froze. Her fingers stiffened around the phone. "Yeah," Michael continued. "Guess we'll have to wait longer to sell that land. And listen, make sure I'm the one calling her more often, okay? Don't want her getting any ideas about splitting it with Clara." There was a soft laugh, presumably from his wife, followed by the sound of dishes clinking in the background. Eleanor sat in silence, the blood draining from her face. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The room felt colder, larger somehow, as if her very foundation had cracked and shifted under her feet. She stared at the window where the light filtered in, illuminating the dust particles dancing slowly in the stillness. All her life she had believed that love, especially a mother's, was a currency that returned interest, not in money but in care, in reverence. Now it seemed she had miscalculated, deeply. She placed the phone down on the table, slowly, with the care of someone handling a relic. The call finally ended with a soft beep, but the echo of those words lingered in her ears like a bitter melody. She sat motionless, staring at nothing, the tears not yet forming, because what she felt wasn't sadness. It was a deep, hollow astonishment, the kind that didn't let you cry right away. Not yet. She turned her eyes toward the mantel above the fireplace, where the family portrait still stood in a wooden frame. Michael, maybe 11 in the picture, with a lopsided grin and an arm slung around his younger sister Clara. Her husband, William, standing tall behind them with a hand on each child's shoulder. and Eleanor herself in the middle, smiling as if she had the whole world in that one captured second. She let out a slow breath and whispered into the quiet, "Was it all just a story I told myself?" Outside, the wind picked up, and the old oak tree creaked slightly, as if responding. Eleanor sat there for what must have been nearly an hour, her hands folded in her lap, her tea long since gone cold. The fireplace let out a soft groan as the last of the embers faded into ash, and still she didn't move. Didn't blink much. Just stared at the family portrait as though it might offer some explanation, some clarification that perhaps what she had heard wasn't what she thought it was. But she knew, deep down she knew, there was no mishearing the sharpness in Michael's voice, no misinterpreting the way he spoke of her, not as a mother but as an obstacle, a legal inconvenience standing in the way of his plans. She had always known he was ambitious, a bit too proud of his success in real estate, but she'd told herself that beneath all that he was still the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee and run to her arms, the boy who once gave her a crooked ceramic ashtray for Mother's Day, painted unevenly but with all the sincerity in the world. What she heard today shattered whatever remained of that illusion. Her mind, still reeling, was suddenly pulled back by the trill of her phone again. She glanced down. Clara. Her daughter. Eleanor hesitated, her finger hovering above the screen. Her heart didn't quite have the strength to be broken twice in one morning, but instinct took over. She answered. "Hi, Mama," Clara's voice came through, light and kind as always. "I was just thinking about you. I know you've been a little under the weather. How are you feeling today?" The warmth in Clara's tone was familiar, and for a fleeting moment Eleanor clung to it like a lifeline. She replied gently, carefully masking the bruises left by the earlier call. She spoke of her recovery, of the new novel she'd started, of how the wind had knocked over one of her flower pots, but she managed to replant the geraniums. Clara listened, offered laughter and sympathy in all the right places, but then, just as Eleanor began to relax, her daughter's voice shifted ever so slightly. "Mama, have you ever thought about coming up to the city to live with me? I mean, you're all alone out there. I could take care of you, really take care of you. And I was thinking, maybe we could sell the old land. I know it means a lot to you, but with that money we could buy something nice up here. I could finally have a guest room just for you." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. She closed her eyes, not in anger, but in quiet disbelief. She had always prided herself on raising children who were kind, who were thoughtful, but now, it seemed, both of them had somehow grown into people who saw her not as a mother, but as a stepping stone, a means to an end. It wasn't about her well-being. It was about convenience, about money, about securing their futures under the guise of familial. She offered Clara a soft thank you, told her she would think about it, and ended the call soon after with an excuse about needing to rest. Then she sat in the quiet again, the kind of quiet that wraps itself around your heart like cold hands. The sun had shifted, casting a golden glow on the hardwood floor, the same floor where years ago Michael and Clara had once laid out crayons and coloring books, arguing over who got the blue. She could still hear their laughter if she listened hard enough. It was faint, buried beneath the weight of years and change and disappointment, but it was there, like a song she hadn't heard in a long time. She stood slowly, her joints aching with the movement, and walked to the mantel. Her husband's photograph sat in the center, the glass smudged with dust. She picked it up, brushing it clean with the sleeve of her cardigan. William had been gone for nearly a decade, but his eyes in that picture still looked at her with the same gentle certainty she had fallen in love with. She whispered to him, almost ashamed, "They don't see me, Will. Not really. They see what I have. They think—" Her voice cracked, but she held back the tears. Crying wouldn't change the truth. Crying wouldn't bring back the days when her children's affection was pure and uncalculated. No, if she wanted peace, if she wanted to feel something again that wasn't this sharp loneliness masquerading as routine, she would have to find it elsewhere. That night, Eleanor didn't sleep much. She packed a small suitcase, just the essentials, clothes for a few days, her journal, a scarf William had given her once during a trip to the lake, and she wrote a brief note, leaving it on the kitchen table in her careful handwriting. "I'm safe. I need a little time away. Don't worry." By morning, the house was quiet again, but this time not empty. There was a shift in the air, a quiet determination that hadn't existed before. Eleanor locked the door behind her, pulled her coat tight around her shoulders, and walked toward the bus stop at the end of the road, the chill nipping at her cheeks. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that she needed to feel something real again, something honest and human. Maybe she would travel to some of the places she and William had once dreamed of visiting. Maybe she'd find silence among strangers more comforting than the hollow kindness of familiar voices. Either way, she would no longer sit still, waiting for love to be remembered. She would go find it, wherever it might be. At the bus depot, she bought a one-way ticket with no particular destination, only a direction: south. Warmer air, fewer memories. As the bus pulled away from the tiny station, she looked out the window and watched her town disappear behind bare trees and telephone wires, the only home she'd ever known, shrinking into a blur. She didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later, in moments she wouldn't expect, in the shape of a streetlight or the sound of a child's laugh. But not now. Now she just breathed. Days passed like pages turning in a book she hadn't planned to read. Each stop was a whisper of something new. She wandered through cities she'd only ever heard on the radio, sat on benches in parks that smelled like different kinds of pine, drank coffee in diners where no one knew her name. She made it as far as a small town tucked between rolling hills and long stretches of farmland. The air was thinner there, quieter, and she liked the way the hills caught the last of the sun like they were holding it gently. But as night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and she realized too late that she hadn't found a place to stay. The town had no hotels, just a general store, a post office, and a diner that had closed at 6. She walked. And walked. Past shuttered windows, closed barns, and fields that stretched like oceans of dirt. Her legs began to ache, her breath shorter than usual, and her hands shook not from fear, but from exhaustion. It was near midnight when she collapsed. Not dramatically, not like the way stories tell it, but slowly, as if the ground simply pulled her down and she didn't have the strength to resist. She sank to her knees by the side of a gravel road, her suitcase tipping beside her, her coat barely enough to shield her from the wind. She tried to call out, but the night was too wide and her voice too small. And then, by chance or grace, headlights appeared on the horizon. A beat-up pickup truck, humming low like it was trying not to disturb the stars. Inside were Marcus and Tanya Harris, a young black couple returning home from the town's monthly food co-op where they picked up dry goods and supplies for the week. Their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was in the back seat, half asleep with her head against a pillow, a children's book still open on her lap. Marcus was the first to spot the figure by the road. He slowed the truck and pulled to the shoulder, his voice low but alert. "Tanya, someone's there." They got out carefully, unsure as any decent person might be in the dark. But the moment Tanya saw Eleanor's face, pale and drawn, lips blue, fingers trembling, she dropped to her knees beside her. "Ma'am? Can you hear me?" Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, and she tried to speak, but the words didn't come. She nodded instead, barely. Tanya's hand found hers, warm and strong. "We're going to take you home. You're safe now." They lifted her into the truck gently, Tanya wrapping her in an extra blanket they kept in the back seat. Lily woke up and looked at the old woman with curious, blinking eyes, then reached out and touched her hand. "She's cold," she whispered. "Can she sit next to me?" Tanya smiled softly and nodded. "Of course, baby." Eleanor, drifting in and out of awareness, felt the tiny hand rest in hers, and something fragile inside her broke, not from pain but from kindness, from being seen, without explanation, without hesitation. They drove through the quiet night to a small house nestled just off a dirt path, a simple place with cracked shutters and a tin mailbox shaped like a chicken. Inside, the warmth hit Eleanor like sunlight. The smell of cornbread still lingered in the air. A pot of stew sat on the stove, and a stack of folded laundry rested on the couch. It was nothing like her house back home. And yet, it felt like someone lived here. Really lived. Laughter had filled these walls. Struggles, too, but real ones, honest ones. They laid her on the couch, covered her with another blanket, and Marcus put on a kettle for tea while Tanya knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. "You just rest now," she said softly. "We've got you." When Eleanor awoke, the room was bathed in a soft morning light that filtered through thin white curtains fluttering gently in the breeze. She lay still for a moment, taking in the unfamiliar ceiling, the scent of something warm and sweet drifting in from the kitchen, the faint clatter of dishes, the sound of a child humming in the next room. Her body ached, not sharply, but with the dull heaviness of fatigue that had burrowed deep into her bones. She shifted slightly, and the blanket slipped from her shoulders. It was thick, hand-woven, and smelled of lavender and laundry soap. Her fingers traced the texture absently, before she turned her head and saw Lily seated at the kitchen table, legs swinging above the floor, a spoon in one hand and a slice of toast in the other. The girl's hair was braided neatly down her back. Her eyes focused on the bowl in front of her, but when she noticed Eleanor was awake, she grinned and jumped down from the chair, her socked feet padding softly across the wooden floor. "Morning, ma'am," Lily said brightly, her voice clear as sunlight. "Mama says you can have some breakfast if you feel good enough to eat." Before Eleanor could even speak, the child gently touched her hand and added with the sincerity only children possess, "You were really cold last night. We put you right by the stove to warm you up. I even gave you my blanket." Eleanor looked into her eyes, wide and warm, full of concern so genuine it made her throat tighten. She opened her mouth to thank her, but what came out was a quiet sob that caught her by surprise, and suddenly she was crying, not from pain, not from fear, but from something deeper, older, more tangled than she could name. Lily stepped back, startled for a moment, then quickly climbed onto the couch beside her and held out the last piece of her toast, a bit of jam smeared across the top. "It's okay," she said, her small hand steady. "You can have mine. It's the best part." Eleanor looked at the offering, at the earnestness on the girl's face, and the tears came harder. She reached out and pulled the child close, wrapping her arms around that tiny frame and holding on like she was holding on to something sacred. Lily didn't pull away. She just sat there, letting the woman's tears fall into her braids, her arms loosely around Eleanor's neck. It wasn't long before Tanya appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel, her eyes softening as she took in the sight of her daughter cradled in the arms of a stranger, who clearly wasn't a stranger anymore. "Lily, why don't you get some juice for our guest?" she said gently. The girl nodded and slipped away, leaving Eleanor and Tanya in a quiet that wasn't awkward but understood. Tanya crossed the room and sat on the edge of a chair nearby, her voice low and kind. "You scared us, you know. When Marcus saw you by the road, I thought—" She stopped herself, shook her head. "You don't need to explain anything. You're here now. That's what matters." Eleanor wiped her eyes, embarrassed but grateful, unsure how to express the tangle of feelings inside her. She wanted to tell this woman she had once been strong, that she had raised 2 children, kept a house, buried a husband, survived disappointment after disappointment. But none of it seemed to matter now. What mattered was this moment, this warmth, this unearned kindness that wrapped around her like a quilt made from scraps of dignity. Later that morning, Marcus came in from the back with a basket of fresh eggs and a grin that made his whole face brighten. "Hope you like omelets," he said. "Tanya's the queen of breakfast when we've got a guest." He didn't ask who she was or where she'd come from. He just welcomed her, poured her coffee, and offered her a chair at the table like she was family who'd always had a place there. The kitchen was small but full of life. Jars of spices lined the open shelves, a radio hummed low in the background, and the table, though nicked and worn, was laid with care. A chipped plate held warm biscuits. A bowl of fruit sat in the center, bruised apples and firm oranges piled together. And in the midst of it all, laughter. Easy, frequent, shared between Marcus and Tanya, between Tanya and Lily, and eventually, as the hours passed, even between Eleanor and the others. That afternoon, while Lily was outside drawing in the dirt with a stick, Eleanor sat on the porch with Tanya, watching the girl trace patterns under the sun. They sipped tea and said little, but after a while Eleanor spoke, softly, slowly, as though releasing each word cost something precious. She told her about the house, about the children who called when they remembered, about the call she wasn't meant to hear, and the quiet heartbreak that followed. Tanya listened without interrupting, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if what Eleanor said needed room to stretch out and breathe. When she finished, Eleanor looked away, ashamed of how long she'd held it in, how foolish she felt for still loving people who'd stopped loving her back. But Tanya didn't judge. She just reached over and gently placed her hand on Eleanor's and said, "You are not alone. Not today." That night they shared stew by lamplight. Lily insisted on saying grace, her small hands clasped tightly as she prayed for the woman on their couch to feel better, to feel loved. And when she finished, she looked at Eleanor with a smile and said, "You can be my grandma if you want. I never had one." Eleanor didn't answer. She couldn't. Her voice had gone somewhere too deep to reach, but the look in her eyes, the way she reached across the table and held Lily's hand, said everything that needed saying. She stayed. One day turned into 2, and then into a week. The days were simple but full. Helping Tanya hang laundry, shelling peas with Lily, listening to Marcus hum old songs as he repaired the porch steps. She had no television, no schedule, no expectations. But she had warmth. She had kindness. She had something that felt like home. And though she knew this could not last forever, she let herself sink into it like a tired soul finally finding water in the desert. Because sometimes all a heart needs is to be reminded that it still has the capacity to be seen, and that somewhere, even in the quietest corner of the world, someone still believes it's worth the effort to care. As the weeks passed, Eleanor began to sleep deeper. Her dreams no longer carried the ache of what had been lost, but were filled instead with the scent of cornbread, the echo of Lily's laughter, the warmth of Marcus's hand resting lightly on her shoulder as he poured her coffee each morning. They spoke sometimes of their own parents, all long gone, and how they'd raised themselves more than they'd been raised by anyone else. "We didn't grow up with much," Marcus said one evening as they sat on the porch, stars spreading like freckles across the dark sky. "But we always knew we were loved. That's what we try to give Lily. Not things. Just love that doesn't get taken away." Eleanor listened, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, and felt something in her chest stretch wider, as if a door had been closed so long she'd forgotten it was there. 2 months passed. She knew she couldn't stay forever. Her body, though steadied by the peace she had found, was still growing tired. She didn't say goodbye when she left. She kissed Lily on the forehead, squeezed Tanya's hand, hugged Marcus tight, and said only, "You've given me more than I can ever repay." And when Tanya tried to speak, Eleanor simply shook her head and smiled, the way one might when language fails to hold the fullness of a heart finally at peace. Then she walked down the same dirt road she had arrived on, suitcase in hand, but this time her steps were steadier, her spine straighter, and her soul no longer searching for something she didn't believe existed, because now she knew. Kindness, the kind that expected nothing in return, still lived in this world. And for a woman who had nearly lost hope, that was everything. 1 year later, on a mild September afternoon, the Harris family returned home after a long day at the community market, their car filled with jars of preserves, homemade candles, and a small bag of Lily's favorite sweet corn taffy. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting a soft golden hue across their porch steps, when Lily noticed the parcel, propped neatly against the front door. It was wrapped in simple brown paper, no return address, just a single white envelope taped to the front with 3 names handwritten in careful script: Marcus, Tanya, and Lily. Tanya picked it up gently, curiosity flickering in her chest. Inside the envelope was a letter. folded twice, the edges worn ever so slightly. She opened it slowly, and her breath caught when she recognized the handwriting. Eleanor, my dear Marcus, Tanya, and Lily, I hope this letter finds you well, and your days have continued to be filled with the kind of love and warmth that you so freely gave to me. I've thought of you often, more than often, really. Not a day goes by without a memory of Lily's laughter, or Tanya's gentle voice, or Marcus humming while stirring his coffee. The time I spent with your family gave me something I hadn't known I was missing. The sense that I could still be part of something true, that I could still be seen, not out of obligation or pity, but because I mattered to someone again. You may not have realized it, but those quiet mornings, those dinners around the table, even the smallest gestures, they reach deeper than you know. In your home, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like I belonged. For that, I'll never stop being grateful. Enclosed is a small gift. Please use it however you see fit, whether it's for Lily's school, fixing up the house, or just a rainy day cushion. It's not payment, it's thanks. From my heart to yours. Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists in this world, and that even at the end of one road, it's possible to find another path worth walking. With all my love, Eleanor. No mention of goodbye, no mention of finality, just warmth, gratitude, and the kind of stillness that makes a person pause longer than they expect. Marcus read it twice, then passed it silently to Tanya, who placed a hand on her heart and whispered, "She remembered." Lily held the envelope close, then looked up and asked, "Can I write her back?" And no one quite knew how to answer, so Marcus simply nodded and said, "Of course you can, sweetheart." The envelope beneath the letter was thick. When they opened it, their hands trembled. Inside were several bundles of cash, neatly arranged, along with a separate note marked, "For Lily's future." They sat together for a long time that evening, surrounded by the scent of supper on the stove and the soft hum of the crickets outside, not speaking much, just sitting in the quiet, knowing that someone had loved them deeply enough to leave a piece of herself behind. But somewhere else, a different truth lived. At the edge of the small cemetery just beyond the ridge, near where Eleanor had once returned after her time with the Harris family, a modest headstone now rested beneath the shade of an old oak tree. It bore her name, her birth and death dates, and nothing more than a single line. She found peace in kindness. In the months after she had left, Eleanor had returned home, quiet and resolved. She sold her house without ceremony, parted with the things she no longer needed, and gave half of the proceeds to a local children's foundation. Anonymous, just as she wanted. The other half she had set aside for the family, who had reminded her she was still worth loving. No one knew the details except the notary and the nurse who had held her hand during her final days at the hospice clinic just outside her hometown. She had asked for no funeral, no announcement. "They'll know in their own time," she had said gently, eyes gazing toward the window where the sun was dipping low, just like it had that night on the Harris porch. And in another town, days or perhaps weeks later, David and Laura stood in the empty shell of their childhood home, the silence louder than they'd expected. The house had been sold, the rooms bare, only a single envelope left on the fireplace mantel, with both their names written in Eleanor's careful script. Inside, no inheritance waited, only a letter. No anger, no scolding, just the truth, written with the same grace she had always shown them. "My dear children, if you're reading this, it means I've already gone. I didn't want to leave this world with bitterness in my heart, so please know that what I write comes only from love, and the quiet hope that maybe, someday, you'll understand. Being your mother was the greatest honor of my life. From the moment I first held you, nothing mattered more to me than seeing you safe, hearing your laughter, and knowing you felt loved. I never needed grand gestures or perfect words, only the small moments, the ones you can't plan, the ones that say, 'I'm here,' without needing to be said. As the years passed and our visits grew fewer, I told myself you were busy, building lives of your own, and I was proud of that, but there were nights, more than I can count, when I sat at the window listening for a voice or a knock, or even just the sound of my name spoken softly down the line. I never stopped waiting. I don't write this to make you feel guilty. I write it so you'll remember. Love is not measured in what we say when it's convenient, but in how we choose to show up when it isn't. I gave you all the love I had, not because I expected anything in return, but because it was yours from the start. With all my love. When they walked out of that house for the last time, neither spoke, but the weight of what they had lost pressed heavy in the still air between them, not the land, not the money, their mother. In the end, Eleanor Whitmore left no legacy of riches, but she left behind something far more rare, a reminder that love must be lived, not negotiated, that kindness, when given without condition, can outlast even death, and that sometimes the truest family is not the one we are born into, but the one that finds us when we are lost. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.